Darrell, it is great to have you on the podcast.
Kieran, it is great to be with you, and congratulations on the new book, which I know is doing really well.
Thank you so much. And I have to thank you for your contribution. You wrote the foreword, and you could see something in the book that I don't think I could have possibly asked anybody else to have even thought that they would be able to see anything in the book. And so thank you very much for your generosity.
Well, I think you are on to a very important topic because I know you focus on a lot of the mega trends that are basically transforming everybody's life, but then focusing on how people can adapt to this, what it means for
Mm.
people. And I think that's a really important message for people to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're still in 2025, just. We've got, so we're 11 months through. And I want to ask you, we've had a lot of surprises, haven't we? Um, Whiplash levels of acceleration, sometimes hourly, not even weekly, not even monthly. It's just too much. AI governance, breakthroughs to climate disruptions to geopolitical flux. It's been exhausting, hasn't it? So as you look to 2026, in your position in DC, what macro trends, mega trends do you see defining the year ahead?
I mean, there's so many big changes that are taking place. I mean, I know you've written about this, but certainly the AI revolution is really accelerating. Climate change is creating lots of challenges for different people. All the changes, both in terms of domestic US politics and then geopolitics around the world, are really accelerating. And so I think as we think about 2026, all these trends are going to continue, but they're probably going to accelerate, which seems like it's impossible because they're already moving very quickly. I think a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed by all the changes
Mm.
and just trying to figure out how to deal with them. But the level of change is just really going to accelerate. All these issues are going to start to come to fruition. On the job front, I think everybody's worried about the AI impact,
Mm.
specifically how AI could take jobs. We're seeing many of the major companies in the United States lay off workers and formally announce that one of the reasons they're laying off their workers is the companies are now using AI, incorporating them in their business practices, and they don't need all the people that they have right now. So I think that's certainly something to watch in 2026, and it actually could affect people at a very personal level.
Mm. One of the challenges with this level of acceleration, and one thing I've always admired about you, Daryl, is that you are direct and to the point without actually being highly emotional about it. A lot of people would be highly emotional about it for that message to get through, but your words really land. So when you talk about acceleration and AI and employability and the availability of jobs, there's also the acceleration. And I've been waiting for somebody to talk about universal basic income. Is that on your radar?
Absolutely. I mean,
Hmm.
as technology accelerates and as some people end up losing jobs, and I think particularly people doing entry level positions are at risk of losing their jobs, but it's actually not just going to be limited to those types of people. Like they're going to be people with white collar jobs. They're going to see AI start to come into their areas. We're already seeing a lot of applications in finance, in healthcare, in a number of different areas. We're going to see the full impact of this. So people are just going to have to kind of figure out how it affects them, what they want to do about it, what it's going to mean for the workforce. And my hope is that as people start to be affected in bigger and bigger numbers, that there will be a policy response that helps people deal with this time period. And you mentioned universal basic income. Like that's one idea. I happen to think it's a good idea as a way to help people deal with this transition. Because, if you think about it, 100 years ago, a number of countries went from an agrarian to a more industrial economy, but there was a big policy response. Like a lot of countries kind of changed their social welfare policies, created Social Security, workers' compensation programs, disability insurance. I mean, there were a number of different initiatives during that
Hmm.
time period, and it took a while to work through all that, but eventually we emerged in a much stronger position. Today, we're at an equally momentous time period of moving from an industrial to a digital era. It's affecting people in a lot of different ways. And if we come up with an appropriate policy response, I am actually not worried about this transition. Like there are ways we can help people through this, through job
Mm.
training programs and other types of things. But of course, the challenge is, are we going to have an appropriate policy response? I think that's a very open question right now.
Mm, you're being very politically correct, and which is the right thing to do. I mean, I think universally there is cynicism about, how that will move forward. I'm in Canada, as you know, so I'm kind of waiting for some level of inspiration to come from Carney and what he's capable of doing. And obviously, we know that things are very volatile south of the Canadian border. And I think there's a lot of skepticism and concern about, whether or not there'll be that level of support. But as you said, you it requires a policy. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that something positive will happen.
So am I. I mean, it's not a lack of ideas that is the problem. I mean, there are a lot of very smart people around the world who are focused on this, are thinking about the transition to a digital economy, trying to come up with ideas that can help people cope with this. But policymakers are the ones who actually have to implement these ideas. There
Mm-hmm.
are some countries around the world that are making progress, like the Scandinavian countries have actually been in the forefront here. So they are making changes that to me make a lot of sense. I am worried about my own country, the United States. So far, we have not really focused on this. There's a lot of media attention about the possible job impact of AI, but very little policy response. Like, I'm not seeing a lot of seriousness in terms of how we can deal with this and what types of legislation might be required. So I think uh, the thing that would worry me the most about 2026 going forward is really these basic governance questions, like, are our governments up to the task of dealing with all of the large scale changes that are taking place right now?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons, why I wrote my book is because I believe we need CEOs to step up and really do what they can do to make the change that needs to happen in the world. And I know a lot of people say, well, we're when you look at the Edelman Trust Index earlier this year, they're talking about this era of grievance and the fact that CEOs and organizations aren't trusted. There's a lot to do in both governance, and obviously with corporate organizations to make that happen.
Absolutely. And CEOs are actually in a very strong position to implement good ideas. Like, they don't have to wait for government to pass legislation. Like, they can implement things voluntarily for their own organizations. Like, a lot of these companies are reporting record profits. So it's not a lack of money that is constraining them, but I worry that a lot of large companies, especially, and I see this definitely in the tech area, are just laying off tens of thousands of people at the very time they are making record profits. So,
Mm.
kind of the juxtapositioning of those two things is worrisome. And I would want CEOs to kind of pay a little less attention to the bottom line and a little more attention to their workforce, because it's people who drive all of these organizations, and companies really need to take care of their people.
Yeah, 100%. And what would you say, based on your experience, why does that not happen?
There are some companies where it is happening. There are some far-sighted CEOs who are very invested in their employees, and they understand they're the most valuable asset
Mm.
within the organization. But there are other companies that just take a purely financial stance on
Mm.
what they're doing and what they want to accomplish. And so the bottom line becomes paramount over all of their decisions. And I think that then leads them to decisions that harm their employees, lead to large layoffs, even if the company is making a lot of money. And so that's something that I wish they were a little more attuned to their social responsibilities and not just focused entirely on the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that would be a really nice and refreshing perspective. However, if you remember, there was a time some years ago where there would be that level of focus on the employee experience, all of those different perspectives, and I think CEOs were expecting a higher return on investment on that. So I think it's about finding the right level of to try and find that the right level, right balance, the right approach to ensure that everyone is happy in that kind of scenario. But just going back to what you were saying about so many people being laid off right now. We've been seeing this, you know, for decades. That this is what happens. They're always having to cut back depending on what pivots, what shifts that organizations and leaders need to address, or the trends that they need to approach. So I'm just curious, because you're in the front line of seeing what happens, and I want to talk about what you're working on next. But before we go there, what do you think will really take for this level of this shift to happen?
I think the shifts will start to happen when CEOs really focus on the mega trends and start to figure out how they can build on those trends. Like you can't really fight the ticket, you can't fight large scale changes. Those changes are going to take place regardless of whether people like or dislike particular things. It's
Mm,
really about how leaders can adapt to this new environment, how they can kind of orient their organization to continue to do well, despite large scale changes that may be affecting them, and they may have a feeling they can't control those changes. So, maintaining hope, maintaining optimism, kind of inspiring the sense of leadership that they're bringing to that organization,
mm,
I think are all critically important. I think everybody is overwhelmed right now. Like the pace of change is really too much, I think, for any of us. And I
mm.
think it will help people if leaders can kind of step up in a way that generates that kind of hope and optimism and sense that they are adapting to this environment and trying to make changes that are constructive for the entire organization.
Yeah. CEOs, they've got work to do, huh?
They do. It's not an easy job today. I'm glad I am not a CEO. It's very challenging because you're pushed from below, you're pushed from above. There are just so many cross currents. There's so many ways that things can go wrong, and your ability to actually control forces is a little more limited. But there still is an important role for leadership. They can set the moral tone. They can kind of rise above the day-to-day difficulties that everybody is facing. And I think that would be inspiring for the people who work for them, like if they see their leaders reacting in that type of manner.
Mm. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, well, we have a lot of hope. We need this to happen for sure. Okay, so I want to talk about your new work for next year that's coming out. You're currently exploring and working on a topic that I've been very interested in since the early 90s relating to space. So I'm very curious. What can you tell us about what you're doing in the space of space right now?
So I am finishing a book that hopefully will be out by fall of next year, basically on all of the cool things that are taking place in the space area. For 20, 30, or 40 years, space exploration has kind of stagnated, but
Mm,
I would say over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of forward movement really all around the world. I think there are more than 70 countries that have some type of space program. A lot of them, it's like, putting satellites in
mm,
orbit just to improve connectivity and communications. So everybody is trying to think about this. The particular angle that I'm taking is as we start to do more and more in space, uh, commercial companies are playing a more important role. Like in the United States, NASA used to make all the decisions. They were kind of in control of things. Now we're seeing private companies, SpaceX being a prime example, but Blue Origin. There are dozens of other companies that are not nearly as well known that are actually doing really important things. And so I am looking at kind of the policy, legal, and regulatory aspect, what we can do to increase the innovation. A lot of people don't realize space activities actually generate a lot of the innovation that then filters down to the rest of us. Like out of the old space program came GPS. Out of GPS came Uber and online mapping where you can kind of find out where to get to a particular destination. Like there's a lot of really great things that we take for granted now that came out of GPS and other innovations from the space program. And I'm anticipating that in the new space program, we're also going to see tremendous innovation. And in 10 years, a lot of those things will kind of filter down and affect people's day-to-day lives.
Mm. It, for some reason, was it Ronald Reagan who greenlit GPS technology?
I don't recall exactly when it
Mm.
took place, but it's an innovation that did come out of the U.S. Space program.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about satellite communications now also is a result of the space program. I think there now are over 10,000 satellites orbiting the Earth. They're improving communications. They're bringing high-speed internet access to rural parts of the world that never had that
Mm.
before. So it's really a big change. There are a lot of constructive aspects of this. So my research is basically kind of looking at what is going on and thinking about what are the issues that are being raised by it.
Hmm. So for the average CEO, how would this connect with what they need to know right now? Because I'm imagining a lot of people will just say, "Well, I can't see it. I don't need to know about it. That's somebody else's business." Is it a normal CEO's business to know what's happening in that particular space?
They should keep track of what is going on because the innovations that come out of the space program and to be different types of changes that could prove quite beneficial to their organizations. I mean, just the satellite revolution has improved global communications dramatically. It's affecting national security. It's affecting how countries deal with one another. So we're seeing a lot of ways in which what happens in orbit is affecting what happens here down on planet Earth. That is likely to continue and likely to accelerate in the coming years.
Yeah. What's one thing that would be tangible for people to connect the dots here?
Well, there are new businesses that are being created all the time now based on the space program. Like we've already
Mhm.
seen many examples of space tourism. There are several companies that are actually taking very wealthy individuals into space. Right now, it's a luxury game,
Mhm.
but ultimately the costs are coming down. The launch costs are coming down. One of the great things Elon Musk did for SpaceX was develop this thing of reusable rockets that has dramatically cut the cost of launches. And so the cost of space tourism will drop. It will become more accessible to people other than multi millionaires, which is the case right now.
Mhm.
We're also seeing developments in space mining. It turns out that on the moon, on Mars, on comets, on asteroids, they have many of the same minerals that we have here on planet Earth because they were formed, out of the same material that ended up forming the Earth. So there are going to be advances in space mining that are going to boggle people's minds. Like, people are going to see that as like a space fantasy type of thing. But there are companies that are actually working on this now, and they're going to take advantage of that. Uh, Several countries are going to be landing on the moon in probably a matter of just a few years. The United States and China have very active plans ranging from the next 2 years to maybe the next 3 or 4 years. So we will be returning to the moon. There are ambitious plans to go to Mars as well. So there's just a
Yeah.
lot of exciting things that are taking place. And in the course of dealing with all of those challenges, we will come up with higher speed communications, faster internet operations, better wireless devices. So things that businesses use all the time now, they will find significant improvements in the future as these new innovations start to get implemented here at home.
Fantastic. Okay, so you said earlier things are going to be accelerating. You're really not kidding, are you?
I am not kidding. I mean, the whole digital revolution is people used to think on a 5 to 10 year time horizon, the world will be significantly different than it is now. People need to think about the world 1 to 2 years from now,
Mm,
because in that time frame, the world is likely to be substantially different than it is now. I mean, we talked earlier about AI and the job impact. That's certainly going to take place in the very near future. It's actually already taking place, but the acceleration will be taking place very rapidly. Certainly, the geopolitical tensions that exist among all countries. As a uh, Canadian, the US Canada relationship is much more complicated. The US relationship with Mexico is a lot more complicated. The US relationship with our European allies is more complicated. Trump just came back from Asia, negotiated a bunch of deals over there. It's like the whole world scene is changing on a week to week, if not a month to month basis. And that's something that is definitely already affecting the business community. Like, if you're in
Mm.
the manufacturing area and your import costs rise by 10, 20, or 30%, like that's a pretty dramatic change. And I know people in the manufacturing area who are going crazy with all the tariff fluctuations. Like, it's hard for them to know where they're going to be getting their materials and at what price it's going to be. So, like, all of these world tensions already are having dramatic consequences for CEOs.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's almost like we need to rewrite our brain to handle all of this. It's just, there's just I mean, it's very exciting because I find it exciting, but also quite terrifying at the same time, where all of these changes are happening. It's very hard to just stop, stand still to make sense of it all, because, from a sense-making perspective, it is really overwhelming. You don't know where you stand. You don't know whether or not, I have friends that they have businesses, and all of a sudden they're unable to sell their products because of the tariff and the tax implications. So they're having to work out what to do. Um, so you're talking about people need to understand right now, this second, that in the next year or two, things are going to be changing. So how adaptable and how resilient can you be over the next 1 to 2 years to ensure that you're able to evolve and try and come through as unscathed and as unburnt as possible?
People are going to have to be very adaptable and very resilient, because this era really calls for those types of reactions. Because I
Mm.
think what's going on is we all got used to a world that was relatively stable and predictable from 1945 up until the current period. Like, the
Yeah.
post-World War II period kind of introduced, a new international order, new economic rules. There were new regional organizations that got created to deal
Mm.
with a variety of different issues. And it was a pretty predictable situation. That world is gone now. It has disappeared. It's not likely to come back. Even if Trump is out of the political scene in 3 years, it's not going to bring back the old international order that we had since 1945. The new world going forward is going to be more chaotic, less predictable, not very stable. And so CEOs and other types of leaders are just going to have to first understand that, and then figure out how it affects them and how they can adapt to an unpredictable world. And that's not an easy task. Like, I do
Mm.
not envy those individuals having to figure that out, but they have to understand every day they're going to wake up. The world may be different today than it was yesterday.
Hmm. What an amazing adventure. That's the language we need here. It's an adventure, as I think Elizabeth Gilbert calls it, Earth School. Okay, so when you were working on your latest book, is there anything that really surprised you on how space policy, how the space economy, how this new world is going to exist or is currently existing? We just don't see enough of it. I'll just riff for 1 second, which is most people, when they think about the space economy, they just look at it as, oh, this is space tourism, and that's for the 1%. You're seeing a huge ecosystem, but what or a brand new economy and ecosystem. What do you see, Or what did you find most surprising? Was there any jaw-dropping moment that made you think, "Whoa, this is going to shift everything up"?
I mean, the most surprising thing I learned is how the cost of space activities has dropped substantially
Wow.
just in the last few years, in part because of reusable rockets, like
You
the
imagine.
cost of putting anything in space. It's a lot cheaper now than what it used to be. The launches already are becoming more frequent. I think last year SpaceX did like almost 100 launches. So literally twice a week, they are putting something into space. That's going to accelerate. Elon Musk has a model where he would like to see space launches be like an airport, where the planes are kind of coming in and out all the time to various destinations. Like that is where he wants us to get to. Now, that's going to be years off. Like that's not going to happen right away. But the fact that we're already doing 100 launches per year, that could rise to 200 a year, 300 a year. Like it could become a daily thing. The reason why that is important is that then makes the things that seem exorbitant and out of reach of most people become more affordable, like space tourism. The costs are going to drop there. That will become more affordable. The opportunities to mine asteroids will become more affordable. Like things that seem completely impossible now are going to become possible. And there are going to be a bunch of businesses, new types of businesses that then develop out of that. In the same way that when the railroad came along, that generated a bunch of new businesses. When airlines came along, that generated a bunch of new
Mm.
businesses. Like people should just anticipate that space activities are going to grow exponentially. There are going to be a lot of business opportunities. Things that seem impossible are going to become quite possible.
Mm. So I'm going to be controversial and kind of ask you about the climate aspect because a lot of people will say, "Well, hold on a second, planes, aviation fuel, I know there's new hydrogen technology that has been created, so there's a lower carbon footprint associated with air travel, and that's going to be catching on at some stage. And I know that there's going to be carbon capturing machines that will, sorry, not machines, but factories, if I can call it that, or units that will, extract a lot of carbon from the atmosphere, which will be very helpful. But that's going to take until about 2028 until or onwards. What do you think will offset the perceived imbalance from having all of these rocket ships, going up and into space and effectively or essentially impacting the climate system?
Well, certainly the energy needs of frequent launches will be substantial, and so that will be an environmental impact
Mm.
that could affect the overall climate. The types of pollutants that are released during launches when rockets are burning, hundreds of thousands of gallons in a very short period of time, like that's actually an environmental risk that agencies are starting to look at.
Mm.
That's not such of a big deal if you're talking about 3 launches a year. But if you're talking about 100 or 200 or 300 launches a year, that actually does become a big deal.
Yeah.
So, kind of thinking about the environmental consequences of much more frequent space launches is
Mm.
something people need to pay attention to. But on the other side, the other thing that space is likely to encourage, and this is going to be a very positive trend, is scientists are already figuring out how to do a much better job of recycling. They have all, because, when you go into space, like you can't really mine things that you need immediately, like oxygen, water, and other basic needs. So you need to figure out ways to recycle things, and so there are devices that recycle sweat, and I hate to mention this, but this is true. They can recycle urine and turn that into drinkable water. And in fact, on the International Space Station, they are actually doing that right now. So we're actually going to get much more efficient at recycling because of space, because in space, you have to be incredibly efficient. On the Earth, you can actually be wasteful and inefficient and
Mm.
somehow get by with it. You cannot do that in space. So there will be huge advances in recycling that will help both in space and then hopefully back here on planet Earth as well.
Magical. That's a lovely lovely piece of knowledge to share. Thank you very much for that. So humanity clearly isn't ready for all of these big shifts. You look at the global south, they're definitely not ready. There's a lot of migration, there's a lot of unrest, there's loss and damages all happening, etc., etc. What, but most people in the global north don't even think about that. I think that's a negative statement for me to state, but it is pretty common, and there's a lot of denial around that. What would you say? Well, let me ask you, is there an impact on what's happening with the global south to the global north and vice versa? And if you think there is an impact, what would you say the solution is?
The danger is that the global south, which already is left behind to a certain
Mhm.
degree, that could become even worse. They could be left behind in an even more dramatic way than is taking place now. So, for example, this AI revolution requires a lot of data centers. We have a paper out that looks at the geographic distribution of data centers around the world, and we found that two-thirds of the data centers are in the United States, Europe, and China. That the
Mhm.
whole rest of the world basically doesn't have a whole lot of data centers. And what that means is if you don't have data centers, your country's ability to take advantage of the good features of AI are going to be a lot more limited. So that's an equity issue that people need to think about. And people in the developed world need to understand that we don't want inequality or inequity to expand so dramatically that it creates global unrest.
Mm.
Like if people in certain regions feel completely left behind, they're going to be pissed off. They will take actions that will express their anger. We already see that, through terrorism, through crime, through violence, and so on. We don't want that to get out of hand because that will affect the global north. Like
Mm.
countries imagine they can somehow insulate themselves from the problems of other nations. We live in such an interconnected world that is not the case. So we need to pay attention to the global south, not just out of uh, a sense of virtue and a sense of altruism. But if they are really left behind in a serious way, that will come back to us and create problems for us. We need to help them and make sure that they gain the benefits of the digital revolution, and that will rebound to our benefit if we are able to do that.
Okay. So we've talked about AI, we've talked about space, we've talked about potential ways that the population is able to survive and to evolve and to grow and lead. What other megatrends are there going to be for 2026? What do you predict?
Well, the other thing that we have not talked about so far, but I think it's already important, but it will definitely be important in 2026, is just the rise of authoritarianism. We are
Mm.
seeing this not just in terms of government, but in businesses, in nonprofits, in universities. Like decision making is flowing upwards in organizations.
Mm.
Organizations are being centralized. And at one level, I understand why that is happening because there's so much chaos and unpredictability in the world that you basically need strong leaders sitting on top of a strong organization that can deal with that. But there are downsides of authoritarian leadership styles, whether it's in government or in the corporate sector. There's a
Mm.
danger of organizations becoming too centralized. The big risk is losing touch with the rest of your organization. Like if you're sitting on top and basically making all of the decisions, there's a risk that you will become disconnected from your very own organization and make bad decisions or make decisions that uh, don't fit with what's actually going on within your organization. So that's a trend that I worry about. I mean, I have a lot of friends in academia. They feel like in universities today, power has risen upwards within the organization, and the faculty and students don't have much say anymore in decisions within that organization. And this is a change from 5 or 10 years ago. People did not feel that way then. They do feel that way now. So it's just a kind of a trend that is developing across every sector, both government as well as non-government organizations. And I think in 2026, people are going to see that. People will understand, some of the virtues of that model, but we also need to understand the disadvantages of that model and the problems that that creates within organizations.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because uh, even before recent changes from a political perspective, I, I was finding or noticing that a lot of the organizations that I was exposed to, I could see that there was this gravitational pull. It was almost like a shocked reaction when um, they weren't necessarily getting the ROI on DEI, and it meant that they immediately snapped back into an overriding power to where I would actually hear the words, "This is not a democracy. You need to do what I'm telling you to do." And while they had phenomenal brains in their organization, they weren't doing that active listening that is so crucial and so important for organizations to adapt. But I think what I'm hearing from you is that it's actually getting worse.
I think it is getting worse. And that notion you just mentioned of active listening, I think is a really important leadership skill. Like it's one thing for leaders to make a lot of the decisions. I think, that's fairly common in organizations today, but you want them to make decisions informed by what actually is going on in their organization. That means they need to listen to other people within that organization, including people in the entry level jobs. Because, I mean, what I've noticed across my adult life is leaders often have good ideas, but they're good ideas that come from the front lines, from middle management, from people who are actually dealing with the customers. And, they have an experience, they have knowledge that a CEO may not have. And so CEOs need to pay attention to what's going on within their organization. They need to listen to other voices within their organization so that they end up making good decisions. And I worry that all these trends that we're seeing, both in the corporate as well as in the world of government, is kind of moving in a different direction. I worry that leaders are starting to get disconnected from their very own organizations and that they're going to end up making bad decisions.
Mm-hmm. If you could write a CEO memo to it for 2026, what might that look like?
Well, the theme of the letter that I would write would be the importance of humility.
Mm.
All of us who have either been in leadership positions or worked with executive offices should understand this is a time period where there are not good scripts on how to do things.
Mm.
Uh, in a world that's changing as rapidly as our world is changing, with all the mega trends that are taking place, there's no clear formula for success. There's no one clear management style that necessarily is going to always work. And so leaders need to be humble about the kind of situation that they're dealing with now. And they should understand, even if they are super smart and super talented, that there are things that are taking place that are actually going to be beyond their comprehension. They're going to have to face situations that they may have no history of dealing with and don't really have a good sense of how to handle those particular problems. So, being humble means that you're uh, kind of open to other points of view. You pay attention to what's going on in your organization, you listen to other people, and then you make your decision. Like you're still the leader and you're still responsible for what goes on. But being humble means that you understand the limits of your own knowledge and your own experience, and you need to work hard to overcome the limits of that kind of situation.
I'm glad you said that. So, just for listeners, I had Darrell West on my podcast called Get Stoked, Lead Forward during COVID. And it was every single day I had a little podcast episode. And I asked Darrell, I said, Darrell, what's going to be big for, the next few years? And your response was AI. I said, okay, great. Yeah, yeah. So, but what else? AI. Oh, no, okay. Darrell, what else? And you said AI. And nobody could have visualized exactly where we are now, 5 years later. From that point where you just knew AI was going to be running through every single area. So to hear you say humility, being humble with all of the changes that are happening, I hope people are listening to you now.
I hope so too, because this is just the era in which we live. No, there are no set formulas. Nobody has all the answers, but we
Mm.
all have to figure out ways to deal with these issues. Like every day, we're being confronted with new challenges. But I think if leaders are humble and open to a variety of points of view, they'll handle it perfectly well. They'll make good decisions. Their organizations will be successful and will thrive. But
Mm.
if they think they have all the answers, they're going to be sadly mistaken because there's nobody today who has all the answers to deal with all the changes that are taking place.
No, no. Is there anyone in the world in your on your radar that does that well? Can you name drop anyone?
That's a very good question. In the political world, there's nobody who I would put in that category. Like I regularly look around the world at, who are the leaders of
Mm.
major countries. Like there's nobody who I would say is super inspiring or somebody who I would point to as a good role model of they're doing a good job leading their countries. Like, there are citizen protests taking place in almost every country now. Like people are upset about inefficiency, corruption, bad decisions, et cetera, et cetera. In the nonprofit world or the business world, like I'm sure there are actually farsighted leaders who are doing a good job, but it's hard to identify anybody who is doing a good job handling this situation just because it's still so new and we're all trying to figure out how to deal with this.
Well, if everybody listened to Darrell back in 2020 and understood what he was saying about AI, 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 again, I think this is a great time to listen to Darrell and develop one's emotional intelligence and leadership abilities to be able to manage this era that we are in. Darrell, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Carolyn.